I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is former Georgia running back and current Players Lounge leader, Keith Marshall. I don't really know how to phrase that leader. Let's start right there with what you're doing with Players Lounge, because we've talked about it with Aaron Murray and Peter Burns, but like me knowing those guys, I'm assuming they just kind of rode on your coattails of your brilliant idea to start this thing.
I would not say that at all. I appreciate the compliment, but this has absolutely been a team effort. And the God honest truth, there's a guy named Ty Fricks, who Aaron and myself played with in college, who kind of brought the pieces together and got things started. But I think the appropriate way to address it would be co-founder. So I co-founded it with three of my former teammates, and me and Murray are transitioning now into being co-CEOs. So he'll be kind of more of the face, branding, selling to other universities as we expand, and I'll be more of the down and in. So, daily operations, understanding the financing, the strategy, making sure all the different departments are moving in the same direction. But yeah, that's how I would address us.
Let's explain sort of the background of this and why it's kind of able to exist in this new NIL world that we're living in. What role does the Players Lounge play in someone like Stetson Bennett? Hypothetically speaking, like what role would that play in him being able to make some NIL money?
Absolutely. So actually, he was one of our first few athletes. So that's a great example. And the way we kind of brand ourselves, we're an NIL platform. We house a community of fans. So the same way that a lot of these companies think the traditional companies like Arrival, Scout, 247, they have a lot of fans that subscribe. Then on the other side of that, now because NIL, we're able to, get the athletes to engage information, experiences with the fans directly, as opposed to going through a third-party media house. And so that's really what it is. The NIL platform, we have a large consumer base that we're able to use to continuously create opportunities for these kids to monetize their brand. So, we started off with the whole community building PFP project, which we can dive into what exactly that means. And, that's how we started the community. But now, because we have that in place, we were able to do one-offs. So like we have some golf deals for some of our athletes that enjoy golfing. We've done some outdoor things. We've done some performance stuff with cars, just because, we really want the platform to be able to highlight whatever the athlete wants to, whatever his interests or her interests are outside of, the sport that they play.
I've had some talks about like NFTs and the relevance of them and whatnot, but I think with what you guys are doing, NFTs actually have real value because they're essentially like a ticket. It's like a virtual ticket to be able to do these cool events with you guys, and it's kind of connecting players as well. But since you're in this space, I'm curious, like because you've been asked this question, I'm sure before, but how would you define what a collective currently is and its current role in college sports?
So collective, that's interesting, man. I don't know that there is one definition. Like different schools are having different models. I think it's kind of starting to define itself over time. But what we have seen is really collectives are kind of a third party. They work with the university, but they're not necessarily connected to the university. They go out and raise money, somewhat like a private equity fund would, from a lot of the donors, a lot of the money guys that typically would pay for the new facilities and things of that nature. They then, sign all the athletes to contracts. And by doing that, they're able to elicit sponsorship opportunities and other branding opportunities for their athletes, and they basically just put their athletes on salary. So it's a way to kind of use the current infrastructure of, you got to do the quid pro quo. So an athlete has to do something in order to get paid. But in reality, we know, value is subjective. So, you can do really anything. If they have a big pool of money to give you, they can give it to you. So that's kind of how it looks like, in my opinion, that's the way that they're setting themselves up.
What was your reaction to the NCAA saying that it was going to attempt to shut down collectives?
I think it's interesting. I don't know how they're going to do that, though.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like when you tell somebody can get paid off of their name, image, and likeness, ultimately, the market defines that value. So, at Tennessee, the kid got paid some ridiculous amount. It was like $8 million for a recruit. I know that seems absurd for somebody that hasn't played a college snap yet, but if that's what the market dictates, that's what the market dictates. So I think, their overall goal is just to kind of dial things back a little bit and put a lot of structure around it to make sure you're protecting the athletes, you're maintaining the sanctity of the game itself. But I don't know exactly what they're going to be able to do tactically. I'm curious to see.
I want to dig into your background because my coworker, Chris Marler, was telling me about meeting you a few weeks ago at UGA. We were talking about that a little bit off air and how like you were just so incredibly smart. And you're this guy who went to Emory to get his MBA after your playing career ended. I only knew two people who went to Emory and their brains were like 10 times the size of mine. What ultimately led you down that path?
So, I mean, to be honest, it was something that kind of popped up. You always say put yourself in certain positions and opportunities present themselves. My background with athletics. Can you pick that up right now? Are you picking that up in the background?
Yeah, you're good. Don't worry about it. We're good. It's a podcast.
as an athlete, was obviously always kind of, if I'm being completely transparent, was sports came first. Football was my primary focus, but I was very fortunate to have parents that, academic success or, achieving at a high level was a requirement in my household. So I understood the power of academics and having a choice. And so when I kind of dealt with a lot of the injuries in undergrad, I switched to finance, which was a little bit more challenging. I knew would open up opportunities down the road. And so in 2019, I walked away from rehabbing for a couple of years from an injury I got with the Redskins and now Commanders, and kind of go through that dark period where you really don't know what's next. I was dealing with the idea that I didn't get to accomplish in my football career what I wanted to accomplish. I was dealing with physical pain, going through rehab for a couple of years. You're kind of by yourself when you're in that space, and then the uncertainty of what was next. All of that was, it was a transition. It was tough to deal with, and ultimately, my parents and the people that were close to me pushed me to, just get back moving forward towards something. You just need some structure in your life, something to kind of get you back on the path towards achieving whatever it is that you're going to ultimately kind of go after next. And so, I found out about a program called the Consortium that basically, they support minorities that going into higher education, particularly in business. And so I was able to get a scholarship through them. The God honest truth was when I went to Emory, I had no idea what I wanted to do afterwards. They make you go recruit and they do an internship, and all of that was brand new for me. But, that's kind of what led me there. It's just I knew I had to do something in order to get back going and get on my feet again after I was transitioning from ball. And ultimately, it was a life-changing experience. It opened up so many doors. I had opportunities to intern and work for some of the best companies in the world over the last 2 years, and to really round out my business acumen and understand the way that things work in this world as opposed to the athletic world that I come from.
What was the last time that somebody dropped a Herschel reference on you?
More frequently than you would think, since it was so long ago. It's funny. You hear it every now and then, particularly when I'm in Athens every now and then. Oh, you were half a Herschel, bring back a little bit of those glory days, a little bit of the memories.
How much would those shirts have gone for, and how much would you have made? Like fall of 2012, man, like the Herschel shirts, if you had like the exact right logo, that would have been all over Athens.
Yeah, we made a lot of money. I can't even imagine the amount of money these kids are getting paid now. I don't want to throw a number out because obviously we'll never know, but Jesus,
It's pretty amazing to think about you and Todd teaming up the way that you did. And I read an article from like 10 years ago on redandblack.com that the night before you were going to commit, you had told Gurley and some family that you were going to go to Clemson, and you wake up the next day, decide, I'm going to Georgia. Dabo tells you good luck, which I like to think that there's a little bit of saltiness in that little, send off. But take me back to that whole process and why it played out the way that it did.
So it was interesting, man. Growing up, probably by the time I was in middle school, I was always somebody that was a fan of players more so than like a specific university. And obviously, Noshawn was the man. And Noshawn was my favorite player when I was in middle school. And so I kind of came to be a Georgia fan by way of him. And I had family in Atlanta and kind of understood the rich tradition they had, particularly at the running back tradition. The position. And so, as I began to get recruited, the whole time I wanted to go to Georgia. That was always the goal. I went through the process because it was fun. It was an awesome experience, but I always knew I wanted to end up at Georgia. Me and Todd, we ended up connecting, I think, going into my sophomore or junior year through track. And we stayed pretty close because we were both, two kids from North Carolina. Didn't really have any immediate friends that were getting recruited. So we were able to kind of relate to each other on that front. And we decided we wanted to go to school together. And so we ended up taking a whole bunch of our officials, and we both had one left. We were like, all right, let's just go to Clemson, man. It's the last one. We kind of already know where we're going. Let's just go check it out. It's not a far drive. So go to Clemson, and they rolled out the red carpet. And it was by far my best official. They wined and dined my mom, my dad. And so I had friends there. And so after, we walked away from it, it was like I was really feeling Clemson. They just did an amazing job recruiting. I liked Dabo. I liked the running back coach they had. And so I had to do the early commit because I was an early enrollee. And, I was on the phone with Todd and Ronald Darby, who ended up going to Florida State. And we were all kind of boys, and we all wanted to go to the same school. And Clemson's things like all in. So I remember we talked probably till 2-3 in the morning. We got off the phone, like, we're all in. We're going to Clemson. It's a done deal. Keith is going to be the first kind of domino to drop. And there's just something didn't sit right in my soul because it's like I always wanted to go to Georgia. It was like if I would have went to Clemson, I'm sure everything would have worked out. It would have been amazing. But I felt like I always in the back of my mind would have wished I would have went down to Athens. And so ultimately couldn't sleep, woke up in the morning, texted Todd, like, man, I'm not going to be able to do Clemson. Decided to make the Georgia thing happen. And then I spent the next couple of months recruiting him so that he would ultimately come join me in Athens.
Okay. So I got to ask about that next couple months, 5 weeks, whatever it was, where you're recruiting Todd. And and you're basically having to like talk him out of becoming the next CJ Spiller at Clemson. Because I remember he was really big coming out, and that was a huge deal. But like, what was that process like, and talking him into Georgia, and like how much convincing did you have to do?
I don't know. I would be curious. Honestly, I've thought about this. I would be curious to sit down and talk to Ty, like how much of an impact that really had on him. But like we were close. I talked to him every single day. Like, we were absolutely a package deal. We went to all our officials together. So I think I certainly played a role in it because I was there. I was comfortable. I was able to tell them like it's not a facade. The coaches are who they appear to be. The program is what they tell you it is. And so I think having me there hopefully helped push him that way. But I would be curious to know the answer to that question myself, like how much of an impact that had.
Your freshman season just had to feel like a movie. I mean, you and Todd are just dominating dudes, and Georgia's in the title hunt. Like, it's one of those things that they probably show you that type of stuff in a recruiting visit, and how many actual freshmen get to live that out where you're contributing and you're such a big part of a contending team. What was the peak of that season for you?
The peak of it, that is because I remember the Tennessee game. I don't know what week it was.
Like 4 or 5.
Yeah, I had like 10 carries for almost 200 yards or something like that. I can't remember the exact stats, a few big, long touchdown runs. And I remember me and Ty, he had a great game too. So that was when we both he started off strong. I started off okay. And then I kind of had a few really good weeks back to back. I remember after that game, that was when it felt like we arrived. You know what I mean? Like we were there, everybody from a national scene, because Tennessee was good. It was a really good ball game. We ended up pulling away late. And, that was after the game. We went to Longhorns, which was our spot. We would always go there. And like we walk into the Longhorns, everybody stands up, starts clapping. Like, the food is taken care of. And that's when I was like, wow, like, Athens, they support their own. And that's kind of when I first got that feeling of being a real college football, star, and getting to enjoy all that came with that.
You roomed with Todd. I mean, he's your guy. I got to imagine there's a good story in there, or at least one that you're allowed to kind of share on these airwaves about just experiencing college for the first time together and kind of growing and having this, like you talk about, this rise in popularity, kind of walking step in step with one another.
I think we were both a benefit to each other because, as close as we were a little bit of yin and yang. Todd is much more outgoing than I was at that time. He probably still is more outgoing than me. I've opened up a little bit, and, I was much more probably reserved and, didn't want to go out and do all the partying and stuff. So I think having us in the room together was a good balance. I was able to probably pull him back a little bit. He was able to pull me out a little bit and make me become more social and enjoy that side of college a little bit. So, there was a great experience. As far as specific stories, I mean, I have millions of them. I do feel like, I'm sure you've heard stories about Ty, back in college. So we won't get into details, but it was an awesome time for sure.
I've talked to Aaron about this a few, like a handful of times, where we've discussed, okay, everybody kind of understands that Georgia would have taken care of Notre Dame in a national championship at the end of the 2012 season. There's no real disagreement about that. I think even a Notre Dame fan, for seeing the way they played out against Alabama, would say, all right, we would have gotten our tails kicked by a lot of teams. What would your final score have been for that game, a Georgia Notre Dame national championship?
I can't remember what the score ended up being, but it was a blowout, right?
Yeah.
So I think it would have been very close to whatever it was. And our defense may have been better than Alabama's defense that year, so maybe Notre Dame doesn't score. I remember watching the game and thinking, though, because I think TJ Yeldon had a good game and Eddie Lacy, right? I was like, man, that could have been me and Todd. Like, I just remember the whole game. Like, they probably both were over 100 yards. They were running wide open through the lanes. It was like, it was really no competition. I just remember, like, man, we were this close to that being us as true freshmen,
Do you watch that game? Like when that happens, are you sitting at home just like just stewing, thinking about that, or is that one of those things where you're like, nah, I'll maybe I'll hear about this later. I don't really want to pay attention to this. It just.
It at that point, because back then there was like a large break in between like the SEC championship game and then there was just the one championship game. So it was like 5-6 weeks. So we had already digested and understood how close we were to obviously achieving our dream. So I don't think. It was hard to watch. It was just like, I don't know what the kind of word, envious maybe, that it wasn't us, just because I know what we could have done and obviously what that would have meant to Georgia. So, it was definitely, I had that feeling of, man, next year we're going to get to be in a position like that. It was motivation and all that good stuff. But selfishly, I would have liked to rip it up for, 100 plus yards on the national championship stage.
I got to imagine, as great as that freshman year was, there were probably some tough moments for you the rest of the way, where your guy Todd is going off and you get hurt as a sophomore. And then, junior year, a couple of guys by the name of Nick Chubb and Sony Michel come into the picture. And now people it's frustrating that when people look back on that running back room, so many of them will say like Gurley, Chubb, and Michelle. And it's like, do people forget about Marshall? Because that dude tore it up as a freshman. Like, were you ever close to transferring throughout that time?
I wasn't close to transferring, man. I really wasn't. I get that question quite a bit. Because, you mentioned freshman year, we both had enough success to where, like, I wasn't necessarily the superstar, but I was a star. So I got to share in that limelight a little bit. And, the season I had as a freshman, I was getting hit up by agents, hey, you're a future, this round pick. So everything was still on the board. Kind of behind the scenes, what was going on is I tore my ACL when I was young. I tore my ACL in 7th grade. And so I had some I battled back from that for a couple of years when I was really young, and then ended up, getting away from the brace and everything. But it ended up leaving me with really bad tendonitis. So I had tendonitis from the time I was in 11th grade. And so even my freshman year, I wasn't truly healthy. You know what I mean? So I always had in the back of my mind, like, if I could just get to be 100% like this, I feel like I could do whatever anybody else could do, right? And then to go into that sophomore year, and I was kind of off to a slow start because I had gained some weight and my body wasn't feeling great. And then I tore my ACL, MCL, and partial PCL. And so when I did that, I ended up having double knee surgery, right? Because the other knee, they went in and fixed that too. And so I was in a wheelchair for, 2-3 months and had to learn how to walk and run again and all that stuff. And so I think because I had that experience, and it wasn't like I was not playing because of, talent, that it was probably an easier pill to swallow because I knew I had things that I had to work on before I was even in a position to be able to compete with those guys. I couldn't really at that time run. So I was more focused on obviously getting back healthy and trying to continue to pursue my dreams. But I would be lying if I told you that, it's not it was always a fun spot to be in and watch, your best friend, one of your best friends, tear it up and live out all his dreams. And the whole time, obviously, I'm happy for him. I know where the guy comes from. I know his family. I know how hard he's worked. And so, nothing but great things to say about him. But, you do feel like, I could be in that position doing the similar type of things. And so that was tough. And then when Nick and Sony came in, it was funny because I watched them in recruit. I knew they were both 5-star, some of the best running backs in the country. Obviously, being a former, running back of that caliber coming, I knew the opportunity that freshmen would have if they showed themselves capable. So I actually tried to get back the year that they came in prematurely so I could, cement my spot and let everybody know, like, I'm back. And it didn't work out. Like, I definitely should have just waited another year. And then that year that I ended up redshirting my junior year, Todd got hurt, and then Nick came in and had like 1,600 yards, a true freshman. Sony showed everybody what he could do. So I understood what was kind of the transition that, my time had somewhat passed, but being a competitor, being on the team, I was about to graduate with a finance degree. There was an opportunity then to graduate and leave. I kind of was like, I'm going to do my time. I'm going to compete whenever I get a chance to go in there and showcase what I can do. I'll do that, and that's what I did ultimately, and ended up still getting drafted, graduated with a finance degree. Everything certainly didn't pan out the way that I wanted it to, but that's life.
Okay, so I want to talk about the combine, but what was the last time your knee felt healthy? You talk about having basically since 11th grade, like dealing with the tendonitis and whatnot. Like, was the last time your knee felt healthy in high school?
It was 11th grade. The last time I was, healthy is kind of a loaded term. You know what I'm saying? Like, the last time I felt free as an athlete to be able to go out there and just react, and I could train without having to tweak this or that to support, to protect my knee, was 11th grade, which is crazy because I tell people, like, yeah, I had the big injuries, but I really feel like what ultimately was my Achilles heel was the tendonitis, because it was like death by 1,000 cuts. Over time, you can't train the same. When you're out there on the field, you can't play freely. You have to kind of think in your mind, oh, can I make this cut? Can I make that cut? I'm running this way, so I got to slow. And those things just prohibit your ability to. It is inhibit my bad. To be able to just play freely and kind of be out there and have fun, and then train in the offseason, things like that. So I think it certainly was like kind of like that death by 1,000 cuts for me.
The amazing thing is that you go to the combine and you set the mark for the 40 time, fastest 40 in the combine. You run a 4.31. I've always wondered the before and after that. And also you tore it up at the bench press too, and had the highest mark of any running back there. It's one thing if you're going to be a first round guy and you've already got like all this attention, but how quickly did that switch flip with teams talking to you immediately after when they saw how well you tested?
It was interesting. I was in an interesting position at the combine because, as you know, you do a lot of player coach interviews and stuff. And everything I was hearing was like, we feel like you're as talented, as far as just your God-given ability and your upside as anybody. We don't know if you're healthy. And back in my mind, I'm like, well, really not, but I'm going to be up there, act like I am. So I think it certainly got a lot of attention, but at the same time, those teams do their due diligence. I went through so many rounds of medical, checks and different doctors, went out to see some teams versus other teams, MRIs, CAT scans, the whole gamut. And so, I think they understood that, which is why I was a late round pick and a flyer, because, they knew that we had to get healthy.
What would you have run if you had been fully healthy?
I think had I been fully healthy there, I would have run 4.2. I ran like a 4.29 initially, but I pulled my hamstring. So one of the deals about it, when you come back from a knee for whatever reason, your gait is a little off, and so you have a lot of soft tissue, injuries. So I actually pulled my hamstring like severely 3 weeks before the combine, and I didn't train for 3 weeks. I was like sleeping in the hyperbaric chamber. I didn't know if I was going to be able to run. So I only ran the 40 and then did the bench press, and then I kind of like the drills and stuff. I teased that up because my hamstring wasn't 100. I think had I been 100, I would have run, in the mid 4.2s. And if I never would have gotten hurt, I don't know. One thing I'll tell people is like, talent and actually what you go out and produce and realize two different things. But when it comes to like just pure God-given abilities, I do feel like I was in a very special spot,
There's no denying that whatsoever. Did you ever consider a track career, or was that off the table once the injuries started to pile up?
I never considered it afterwards. I never really considered it at all. I ran track my whole life, but it was always in service of football. Like I said, I met Todd and a lot of other friends that ultimately played football as well through track. And so I ended up, whenever I was 15 or 16, I had the number one time in the world for a while. And so like I had track coaches that recruited me, but everybody knew I was a football, So I ran track at Georgia for 2 years.
Even after Georgia, when or even after your playing career in the NFL, did you ever think to yourself like, maybe I should give this a chance? Did you ever have any of that post NFL interest to do it?
I didn't. I don't know that I have the same love for track. That I enjoy competing, but the practice part of track is grueling. You know what I mean? So
just have to get up and run every day.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if I had the love for it to be able to do it professionally.
What was this past year like for you, watching your team win a national championship? I've talked about that with Aaron, about just kind of not having to hear about 2012 all the time, even though I asked you about 2012 earlier, but just being able to kind of move past that and watch your program be able to kind of do what everybody said would never be done.
Mm-hmm. Well, it felt like a long time coming, which I'm sure everybody would agree with, because we've been so close for so long. Like you mentioned 2012, that was 10 years ago. And then the year before that, they were competitive and in that conversation. And we've always had, top talent, top coaches. And so, to see it all actually, manifest into a championship was awesome. And then obviously I watched every single game and see how dominant they were. Like, it's one thing to win. It's another thing to win the way that they were winning. Like, it was, no question who was the best team on the field, every game except for when we played Alabama, maybe Clemson early on. So it was super exciting, man, to just see those kids go out there and compete, to see what Kirby has been able to do in Athens year in and year out from a recruiting perspective, and then be able to develop that talent to the point where you have a defense with all the guys that we just saw get drafted, and then we know the guys behind them. So, it was truly amazing. And then obviously, selfishly, again, we parlayed that into also dropping the players launch NFTs at the same time. And so it was a win-win that week. It was good on the field for UGA, and then we did well that as well.
Business is booming, as they say. Yes.
Extremely booming. Yeah.
Definitely. I want to get you out of here with some rapid fire. Just 5 questions. First thing that comes to mind. Does that work for you?
Yep.
All right. First one, say something nice about the NCAA.
They give a lot of young people opportunities to showcase their skills.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer.
It's like half truth, but yeah.
Sure, I'll take it. Name a football player who could have beaten you in a race at your peak.
Rocky Ismail, baby. I don't know that. I was fast, bro. I'm not gonna lie. I was very fast.
You got to go back to the early 90s to find someone.
I'm trying to think. Like, I was thinking Tariq Hill, but I saw his 40 time, his 100 time, and I would have been right there. I don't know that he could beat me, while I was healthy. Yeah.
You beat Herschel?
Yeah. I'll put money on the line on that one. Yes, for sure. Yeah.
All right. Outside of Athens, what was the best college stadium you played in?
I would say, I'll answer that question too, as it's rapid fire. Tennessee, as far as the visual, because it's just crazy, like it's all the way around. But as far as the experience and how loud it was, I would say South Carolina.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a really good. That's whenever somebody asks me like, what's the difference between like the Big Ten and the SEC? I'll say like South Carolina can get 80,000 people rocking even after they just won 2 games and they have no chance of winning the division. And that's the difference. Yes. Unbelievable. Speaking of South Carolina, did you ever apologize to that poor South Carolina defensive back that you juked out of his entire body?
No, I did not. It's part of the game, man. We all get got,
Who was that?
I have no idea.
All right, last one for you. Over under 2 more national titles that Kirby wins at Georgia.
Over. I'm very bullish on Kirby, man. I've been that way for a while.
Do you find yourself wishing that you could have just been able to have like that extra year of eligibility to be able to, well, I mean, you had the extra year of eligibility, then you're like, I'm going to the draft, and understandably so. But do you find yourself wishing you could have been able to kind of play in his team, or even maybe in the Todd Monken offense?
Yeah, on the Kirby deal, and that's no slight against Coach Rick. I really do, have a lot of respect and appreciation for Coach Rick. But I think the energy that Kirby brings, at least from the outside looking in, it appears to be a little different. So I think it would have been cool to be able to see, how a different regime came in and did what they do.
Keith, this has been great, man. Everybody, go check out everything the Players Lounge has going on. Best of luck with everything. It's awesome to see.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you having me on.